Welcome everybody to the Social Innovation Conference, brought to you by the Social Outcomes Lab and supported by the Australian National University and ACT Government. My name is Shadab Parvez and I'm co-facilitating this webinar with Nazia Ahmed, the founder of the Social Outcomes Lab. Today we'll be talking to Stacey Gershberg from Choice, Duco van Bremen from Haymarket HQ, and Michael Tan from Ilenta on the future ways of work. But I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the Bejigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians on the land from where I'm conducting this webinar today in Walleye Creek, Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from where our viewers are joining us from today. I'd like to pay my deep respects to our elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge the rich culture and wisdom of Aboriginal people. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the trauma, pain, and suffering that Aboriginal people have endured, and that Aboriginal people still face considerable gaps in social outcomes compared to the rest of the population. The Social Outcomes Lab is committed to working together to reduce these gaps in whatever shape or form that we can. Now, the coronavirus pandemic is a challenge of our times. The time for organizations to build for speed is now. This will be a long process and leaders must leap into the arena and recognize that many of their familiar organizations' constructs will need to be reimagined. Many companies, at least initially, thought that the post-pandemic return as an event would be just going back to work, turn the lights on, and just do as they have been doing work before. But it's becoming increasingly clear, however, that for many, returning to work will be a process that could take a year or more, and that they cannot go back to the work that they were. Instead, companies will want to seize the moment to reimagine and reinvent the future, building new muscle and capabilities to come back strong. Even well-run companies may find that they need to reinvent themselves one more time. And that's one of the reasons that we decided to run this webinar with phenomenal people in their respective areas. We have Stacey Gershberg, we have Duco van Bremen, and Michael Tan. So can we have just a little bit of an introduction from yourself, Stacey, as to what you do?
What do? I work for Choice, the consumer advocacy group, and I am the current director of people and culture. I've been with Choice about 15 months now and have been on the ride of the last few months of COVID and been in charge of the people and culture function through that time.
Hey, I'm Michael. I have founded a startup called Ilenta. We really believe that organizational corporate learning should and can be more effective. So what our startup does is it basically helps people learn skills by applying their skills on the job.
Hi guys, my name is Duco. I'm a Dutchman that spent most of his adult life in China, and for the past 4 years I've been in Australia, where I manage Haymarket HQ, which is in the back. We offer co-working space, digital programming, and mentorship to startups that want to grow into the Asia Pacific region, as well as startups from abroad that want to come into Australia.
Nazia, last but not least, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Shadab, and thank you, Stacey, Michael, and Duco for being our amazing panelists. So as Shadab mentioned, I'm the director and founder of the Social Outcomes Lab. I'm an economist by background, and now I get to have a lot of fun working on lots of different social impact projects, particularly in government and the NGO sector. And then I also get the opportunity to hang out with amazing people such as our wonderful panelists and co-facilitator today. So that's me in a nutshell.
You know, there's so much to cover, and this is such a rapidly evolving situation that we're all in. And, you know, as we are trying to settle into our normal work modes, things are changing on a month-to-month basis. It used to be on a daily basis, but I think there's some normalcy coming around the corner when it comes to flexible workspace. Now, I'm just going to share a few slides just to give us some context as we are going through our conversation. Give me one moment. So, as I was doing a little bit of research on how companies are responding to the flexible, workspace, there are 5, areas that companies are focusing on to be able to build capital. So we've got, enabling employees to have focus and being able to get their outputs done, which is productive capital. They've got the importance of collaboration. Collaboration fosters innovation. Co-creation and learning is being able to, build intellectual capital within an organization. Well-being is an extremely important part as we are getting into the new normal. And obviously there's the social capital, the social interactions, the informal interactions that allow us to relate to each other as human beings and co-workers. All these elements build an important place for people to be able to work and get the most out of their organizations and the jobs that they need to do. Now, when it comes to the mental health situation that a lot of the employees, such as ourselves, and that we are facing, what are some ways are your organizations approaching this? I'll start with Duco. You are a general manager of co-working space. You're working with a lot of different organizations that have their employees on site, and maybe they're also changing as to how they're working. Maybe they're having fewer days at your workspace and more days from home. What are some of the ways that, as the general manager of a co-working space, that you're trying to foster mental health and improve mental health?
Yeah, great question. I think I'd like to start with, if you look at the research, I think nearly every one of us is struggling in some way. There's the increase in anxiety has been tremendous. Even if I speak at it from a personal point of view, I've definitely felt that anxiety as we went into lockdown and as we're going out of it. And a lot of that stems from the fact that we have no idea what the future looks like. We don't know when the borders will open. We don't know when people will be able to walk the street normally again, if that ever happens, or when we can see our loved ones again abroad. And that obviously also impacts how companies look forward and how they plan their next year. And there's been a lot of a lot of redundancies and potential redundancies on the horizon. So I think it is an anxious time, and it's something that we just have to admit to ourselves. Obviously, we're all feeling a little bit more distressed now than we did last year at this time. At least I hope so. In that sense, I hope last year was better than this year for you. As for how are we managing it, I think I'll take the approach both from the team that I manage, as well as how we try to manage the community. If I look at my team, the first thing that I did was to make sure that we did daily morning check-ins where we said, well, what are your anxiety levels like? What are your motivation levels like? What's troubling you? I have coworkers with family that are in regions where they've been heavily hit. People that have COVID, these are tough times, and they cannot visit them. So just having an outlet, being able to talk about it, also at work, knowing that we care, knowing that we take that into account, that your productivity may be a little bit lower as a result, has I think been quite important to most of them. We also have a program in place that allows any staff member to connect with a counselor, so that they have a number of free sessions, which is obviously very useful. It's anonymous and something that we're very happy to be able to offer. Also, making your employees aware that it's okay to feel a little bit anxious, to feel a little bit distressed, and making them aware of the various support that's out there. We made sure that mental health was not a taboo in our workplace. And for anyone listening, I would encourage you to look into your Medicare support. I believe you can get 8 or so free health or what is psychology sessions as part of that. Make use of it if you need it. And there's various other resources available as well. So The key thing that we did was open up about it, share your own struggles, and make sure that they understand they're not alone. We're all struggling, right? Whether that's today or tomorrow or in the past, at some point, 8 out of 10 people will have some type of anxiety or stress. And some of us may have that on a more chronic basis and need more support. And that's perfectly normal and perfectly fine. And then from a community point of view, the first thing that a lot of people have trouble with, especially in an environment like ours, which is a co-working space, where you share ideas, you build friendships, you whiteboard ideas. It's all about that connection piece, that community piece. A lot of people suddenly lack community. They were suddenly stuck at home, and especially those that are, for instance, single, that have no loved one or family around them. They're suddenly stuck in a studio apartment in inner West Sydney. That's very tough. So building a artificial co-working community online was a big thing, a big priority for us. And that for instance, what we did is we set cameras up around the place so you could still see and sort of picture yourself in the co-working space. I would still come in because we own the building, so we have direct access. So I suddenly had 700 square meters to myself, so social distancing wasn't terribly difficult. And we had a thriving sort of WhatsApp channel. We did all kinds of initiatives in there. We did the push-up challenge. So we raised $1,000, for instance, for a mental health charity. And some of us got very ripped in the process, or injured in my case. So we did whatever we could to engage people in different ways, using different channels, and still keep that resemblance of a community and actually have a bit of fun while we're at it. So that's in a nutshell some of the initiatives we've taken.
That's amazing. That's really, really amazing. It's very, very, very different, and it's one of those things that's evolving on a consistent basis. Stacey, I'd like to hear a little bit from your end, and obviously I'm working at Choice as well. And can you tell us a little bit about how Choice is approaching mental health at the workplace?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of what Duco said obviously resonated with me, and doing things along very similar lines. With that whole piece around anxiety, it's definitely there. Some of the things we are doing is to make sure that we can give some certainty in a world that's uncertain, basically. So there are some things that we can't change that are not within our control, but we can give some certainty around work and how we approach work. And it's important that we can do those things. Some of the strategies are really simple, but they're effective. It's about the connection piece. So, for example, all levels of leadership being more visible than they normally would be. So we've made time in our we have monthly full team meetings, which means the whole organization can come together virtually. And we have now a segment where the executive team gets questions and we answer them online virtually for people. Our CEO is now attending in a greater amount our virtual meetings, weekly ones, monthly ones. He's dropping in to our team meetings regularly. It's that visibility piece so that people feel a bit more certain. A lot of people don't want to be looking at the news. It makes them anxious. So my work health safety team has taken that over, and we provide our own updates every single day so that if people don't want to go to the news, they don't have to. It's a lot of those things. It's a bit of a journey, to be honest. I think the whole psychological mental health side of it is evolving. So I think the anxiety we were feeling at the beginning is different to what it is now in a way. So, and we sort of had to evolve with it. So to begin with, it was all the daily check-ins, making sure that people were just feeling okay. We focused, for example, on certain groups, like those people that were living alone, and also parents, because for an extended amount of time, parents had children at home and expected to homeschool in a way while working. I was one of them. And, there was nothing to prepare you for that. So we, for example, offered an online school holiday program during the school holidays for parents, just so they could focus for a couple of hours a day. it was all of that, and it had to be done really quickly, and we had to pivot really quick. So I had a whole people and culture team working on just that. How can we make people feel a bit more certain in an uncertain world? Then once we could sort of settle our thinking down a bit, it was about designing for the future, having a bit of strategic foresight. So we actually brought in an external consultant to run a Design the Future Way We Work project. So she, she sat down, well, virtually, and ran focus groups and individual interviews and surveys, so we could find out for ourselves what people wanted, and how much of the workforce wanted to be at home, who didn't. We didn't want to design anything without, the evidence base. So, at some point, you can actually start to think clearly and go, all right, we've checked in with people. And the other thing we do that's really important regularly is we do pulse surveys. So we started doing pulse surveys at the beginning every 2 weeks, asking the same questions. Can you rate yourself this week, what your well-being is like? Do you feel like you can deliver in your position? And that wasn't to performance manage anybody. That was to make sure that people were okay, and we didn't need to be reaching out more at any given time. We also put in, some open-ended questions about connection to each other, for example, among other things. And every 2 weeks, we would then turn that around and go, what actions can we do from this? And just quickly turn it around so people could see that we're actually proactively doing things. So now we've sort of scaled back to every 3 weeks. But, for example, we just got the results from our last pulse survey, and putting our heads together. That's the exec team, all people managers. We have a Future Ways of Working committee, all working together around now how can we help people feel connected. So it's forever evolving. It's a very agile approach. We're trying different things. Some work, some don't. But it doesn't have to be a complicated strategy. People just want to feel connected. It may just mean having a program where you can drop into each other's meetings, which is what we're working on. That sort of thing. And we also have more formal approaches, like we've had a series of webinars around resilience, stress management, anxiety, growth mindset. So we're sort of hitting it from different angles, and, they're all landing at certain percentages, you know what I mean?
So it seems like there's no formula really, and it's
hard to have a formula when there's no precedent, right?
Yeah. And also another thing is that, as an organization and as an employee, and that has certain tasks to complete on a daily basis and certain outputs to achieve on a weekly basis, all of a sudden you're disengaging from an environment where you're constantly communicating with each other and sort of getting the answer and getting the direction, to a virtual environment where you don't know whether you're kind of concerned about, am I reaching out to my manager? Is it the right thing for me to reach out to my manager at 8 p.m. with this idea? Because he or she might feel that, Shadab is reaching out to me at this point in time. Yeah, it's a bit disruptive, but I also feel bad that I'm not able to respond. There's so many emotional things that are happening, right? In terms of getting the job done, not just from the COVID and the safety and safety side of things, as to, exposing yourself to getting infected with COVID. That was in the beginning, like you said. So starting from March all the way through to, I'd say, June. Now it's about, okay, we're here, this is a new normal. How do we get back to productivity? How do we get back to, how are you finding that, Stacey? Is that coming up in the pulse surveys?
Definitely coming up. One of the things, our main focus probably is how do we take collaboration forward in this new world? We do love our tools. So we're big fans of Slack. We use Slack regularly. I think that's a wonderful tool for this new world. And they're also doing lots of iterations and experiments to make Slack better. I don't work for Slack, so I'm not getting anything for this. But it's been super helpful just being able to go on there and see people's statuses, you know, if nothing else, like when they're working, where they're working, you know, and you can check that at any given time. Again, we use Trello. And the interesting thing in all of this is if you weren't a big user in these things, you have become one. So it's actually shown opportunity, and actually, you know, on a positive note, it's shown what can be possible. So as part of Choice, we have a whole reviews and testing department, right? Works in labs. Never in a million years would these people think they could have worked from home. And you know what? They did. So it's opened the whole world up. You know, there's obviously a lot of anxiety and stress and those things going on, but at the same time, there's such an opportunity to change the way we work. And sometimes it's a traumatic event that's a catalyst for those things. And that's certainly the way we're looking at it. And tools will help us get there. For example, we're pivoting meetings. That's been a whole thing. And using Miro, the virtual whiteboard tool, a lot now. Like in departments that wouldn't, like mine, people and culture. You know, why would we use Miro? We don't run sprints. We don't run agile teams, you know, but we're using Miro. So yes, meeting culture and collaboration right now is number one. And that's phase 2 of our design project. That's what we're working on right now.
Fantastic.
It's amazing. Can I jump in? Can I ask a question? Right. So, Stacey, I just found it phenomenal that you were able to mobilize and put that emphasis on mental health sort of so quickly, right? And do you feel like other sort of large organizations are doing sort of similar things? And do you think this kind of focus on mental health, which is such an amazing and such an important aspect, do you think that this will become sort of like a new narrative and there will be an increasing focus on mental health and people have sort of really understood the value and the importance of that in organizations?
I do. You know, I'm reading a lot at the moment, as everyone else is. I know my colleagues in the HR community are completely focused on this for the organization. It's widespread. And I do think from what I've seen and what I've read and the people I've talked to is that, again, it's a catalyst. This pandemic event, I truly believe, is a catalyst for things that probably would have just taken a lot longer to happen, you know, bringing mental health to the forefront, bringing mental health first aid in leaders to the forefront. You know, that is our job as leaders to be the keepers of psychological safety, you know, for our organization. So, like I said, as traumatic as things are, there's always these wonderful things that come out of it, you know, and that's certainly there. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. What about Duco and Michael? What do you guys think?
So firstly, Stacey, I laughed a bit at your comment about homeschooling and working from home. That's something that I found really eye-opening. But I do agree with what you say. So what I've seen is that companies of all sizes are really focused on mental health and just wellness overall. And it seems, from at least what I'm hearing, that it's basically 3 reasons. One reason is this: a lot of people have jobs insecurity, so they're not really sure what's happening. There's a lot of uncertainty in their lives. And they might have seen their peers or colleagues being made redundant, and there's an open question about what's going to happen with them. So that brings a lot of anxiety. The second one is around social isolation. So I think, as you were saying, Duco, a lot of people are working from home. It might adversely affect single people, as an example, badly. But this whole idea of, well, I'm physically disconnected from my people or from people. How does that make me feel? How difficult is that? And an adjacent point to that is that work and life has kind of blended into this weird mix. So when actually do you turn off if you're not physically leaving an office? What are the expectations around answering Slack messages at dinner time? So from my perspective, I would agree 100% that this is something that companies care about a lot right now.
Yeah, I have very little to add to what Stacey and Michael have said already. I think I agree with all the points they've mentioned, and I think a lot of the companies, fortunately, we're in Australia, where a lot of companies do, pay a lot of attention to mental health. So I've only seen a lot of more people coming together than drifting away, to be honest, during this past time, and in the little community that I have around me, of course.
Wonderful. Sorry, Shada, before handing back to you, we have a couple of questions from Paul Mizzi. Thank you, Paul, for joining and your questions. This might be a good time to, because it's still on the topic of mental health. So very good question. So have you observed productivity decreasing at all?
No, not at all. It's the complete opposite, actually. So I think it depends on your strategy and making people feel safe. And that goes back to psychological safety. I know that at Choice, the last time we measured productivity is at 95%.
Amazing.
Yeah. And we do it and we measure that now every 3 weeks to see if people can deliver in their roles. And the last time we measured, it was 95.
So has productivity increased, or it stayed the same? It's increased.
No, it's increased.
Wow, amazing.
I think it just speaks to the fact that although we're focused on the external factors that are causing us stress and anxiety, but if you work in a place that's supportive, and makes you feel certain about what you're doing, and you're all, moving towards the same goal, you can still have that. And in fact, if you completely support people's flexibility and you don't make them feel bad about that, they actually want to work. And I think that's where it comes from. We are also, I want to say excited is the wrong word, but we're also motivated as a large team and within Choice. We're motivated towards our purpose, which is to help consumers. And I'm grateful that, whatever it is we're doing, all the millions of different things we're doing has got us to that number.
It's really phenomenal.
Duco, do you have anything to add from your Haymarket HQ versus the tenants?
Yeah, I've seen the opposite, to be honest. So hat off to you for keeping that productivity so high. I think if I look at our own team, especially it depends, I think, on the business you run as well, right? So in the case, if you look at, for instance, we do a lot of virtual programming with, for instance, government and corporate, large-scale virtual programs. Now that has taken off, and that was great. But initially, what happened is that our co-working space emptied out. Right now, that has quite an effect on your team if it's only 100 people leave in one go, right? As well as a number of projects that had to get canceled. So I think productivity was definitely a bit lower as we're trying to figure out, well, what are we doing? Because we had to rethink our business. And with that come a lot of questions, and with that comes anxiety and stress. So productivity was lower, and I had no trouble with that whatsoever, because I think that was just a natural sort of byproduct of having to undergo such a big change. If I look at the moment, we're pretty much back to normal in the sense that a lot of my colleagues work from the office. We're quite safe, and I'll talk about how we did that later on. And if I look at the other companies around us, a good number of them had to deal with productivity issues. People simply either not being motivated enough and now having the perfect opportunity not to have to do too much. There's always a few of us that are in the office just waiting to go home, basically waiting for the clock to hit 5. Obviously, those people suffered a little bit more from I think that lack of structure and that lack of supervision, and that's what I've been hearing, at least. So if I look at the people here, there's been lower productivity because had to get used to new tools, there's kids running around, there's uncertainty about the future, there are partners with redundancies. So I think there was this seismic sort of shift that has definitely impacted people's productivity, which again, I think is just to be expected. But, obviously every company is different. I would imagine that Netflix doesn't have that issue, for instance. Some companies you have to run a little bit harder. Not that means that therefore productivity is higher, but knowing that your company is doing well, knowing that your funding is safe, obviously does help you do your work better as well.
Can I just add something? Sorry, because I don't want to give someone the wrong impression. Our productivity is at 90% now. When parents were working at home, it dipped. So at the very beginning, it was around 70, which is still, it's still good. But it definitely dipped when people were trying to look after their children. We have a third of our workforce as parents. So definitely, like you said, Duco, for obvious reasons it dipped down. It springed back very quickly after children went back to school. So that was primarily the reason why it dipped.
How do you track productivity?
We don't track it by a formula, for example. We track it qualitatively through asking questions in our pulse survey. Mm-hmm. And then once we get a number that people decide that they're working at, then we check in with managers to cross-check it to see if that's actually the case in terms of how their team is actually traveling.
Interesting. Yeah. Michael, are you finding any sort of, because obviously you're a startup and you're getting more and more customers to come onto your platform, are you finding the requests and designing an L&D or customizing the L&D packages to change from when you had initially when you were initially designing your startup to what you are ending up doing right now when it comes to L&D programs and reskilling, upskilling clients?
That's an interesting question. I'd say the topics somewhat have changed. So I'm seeing, as mentioned earlier, a lot of wellness programs come through. Right. This is something that companies are investing more in. The structure of training programs is changing as well. So if you think about it, the new world of training is very unlikely to be flying people from interstate to a room to sit for 2 days while the facilitator talks to them. Like, that just seems like it's no longer going to happen. So what that does mean is that people are transitioning a lot of L&D to a virtual environment. Now, when that first started, it was actually pretty poor because people would just take exactly what L&D program they had and literally just put it on Zoom. So you would end up with 6-hour Zoom sessions where someone talking to an anonymous group of faces. And that just doesn't work. Like, there's a whole bunch of research around Zoom fatigue, which is apparently a real thing. But then people started getting wise to that, and they started realizing that actually you can't expect people to watch a Zoom session for 4 hours. Maybe 60 minutes to 90 minutes is probably the upper limit on what people would be happy to sit in front of the computer for and learn. So that's kind of changed things. The other thing that we're seeing is that rather than these monolithic 2-day training sessions in one go, it's short snippets of training spread out over weeks or months after. And so the idea is that it gives people the knowledge, but also gives people time to try and apply that knowledge in their work before getting the next session. Another big change is moving from facilitated workshops to more self-paced learning. So the idea is that you should be able to access learning materials whenever and wherever you want and at a time that suits you. So this fits into the whole idea that people are kind of on and off during the day as the times that best suit them. So I'd say there's some of the larger macro trends around L&D right now from comparing pre-COVID and COVID.
Very, very, very interesting insights. Did you have anything to add, Nazia, before we just look at a few slides?
I was just going to say, Michael, it's kind of cool, like, you're talking about, shorter sessions. And I certainly hear this from our friends at ANU lecturers kind of saying, well, and this is pre-COVID as well. So they're sort of saying that the way that students learn have kind of changed and they have to focus on 10-minute slots kind of thing and making that very engaging. And then I was kind of thinking, well, it's sort of like, how now there's an increasing kind of thing on the Netflix series. And rather than kind of, longer movies, it feels like it's sort of that kind of a thing that our lives are becoming, more Netflix series like.
Yeah, totally. Like, I think this trend towards smaller pieces is probably something that's been happening for a while. It's just been accelerated with COVID. But it's a whole lot of research about how people actually learn. And there's this principle called the 70-20-10 principle. And so 10% is actually classroom learning, facilitated learning. 20% is peer-to-peer, I think, and then 70% is on-the-job application. So it's moving people to that 70%, which people are much more interested in now.
Very interesting.
The other thing that's changing a lot is when you think about the face-to-face sessions, that's typically to a group of people, and those people might mingle over coffee or sandwiches during one space, and they would form social connections during the training session. So that's obviously all gone when things happen via Zoom. So people and culture people and learning development people, they need to be much more aware of how do you facilitate conversation, social groups in a virtual environment.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I'd just like to add, Michael, it's so good to hear you also echo the sentiments that we found. I think what you said, that you cannot simply translate an offline course into an online environment, is very true and very often overlooked, and very hard too. We like to take the approach that it needs to be fit for a TikTok audience, in the sense that that's what people are used to now. We scan through articles, we scan through websites, we quickly check a trailer on Netflix or Amazon Prime. We look at TikTok, where we just quickly go through videos, YouTube, you name it. Yet if you look at, say, learning, or even at many events, it tends to be very long. There's still that mass media approach that says, shut up and listen. And that is simply no longer acceptable, right? So I think, it's good to hear your feedback on this. And hopefully the attendees listening as well, that if you want to answer or ask any questions, we're here to answer them.
Yeah, good point. And so, I mean, how you talked about kind of some of those social aspects kind of disappearing on as a result of kind of being on Zoom. So have you come across any kind of creative ways to keep the social connections happening, even if we're not sort of there next to each other to have a coffee or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Maybe as an example, I would talk about running Zoom sessions. So like a good tip is to break it down into shorter sessions, so 60 minutes, 90 minutes, probably max. This guy I was talking to described this idea of 360 Zoom sessions really well to me. Like he said that if you think about Zoom conferences or training, the worst possible experience is me trying to teach 100 people via Zoom, and everyone I can't see their faces, it's just me kind of monologuing to these people. So that's a bad experience. The level up is me talking to, say, 16 people where I can see their faces, and there is potentially like questions and answers popping up. Like that is a much better situation. It's much more organic, and there is some interactivity. But he was saying what 360 Zoom sessions are. It's really small groups of people. Everyone's an admin. Everyone can just talk whenever they want. You can break out into little groups whenever you want. And that's probably the closest way that we have right now to trying to solve for a social environment via Zoom.
Amazing, thank you.
So what we can do is we can move on to some really interesting research snippets that I've been able to find. Give me one moment, I'm just going to share the screen. So this is a research piece that I came across. Stacey, you mentioned there's some research that has been done by Deloitte. I was looking at how overall globally companies are responding, and what are the trends that are coming up as a result of the COVID crisis, particularly from the perspective of the employees, and why do people want to return to the workplace. So this particular study focuses on U.S. workers. Apparently only 12% of US workers wanted to work from home full time, and most do want to return to the workplace, but with critical changes. And some of the reasons the top reasons that employees do want to return to the office are schedule meetings with colleagues. So it's once again the connections, right? The one-on-one connections that you get to have with employees or in a group setting. Socializing with colleagues as well. So I'm looking at this on the slide on the right-hand side. So impromptu face-to-face time and to be a part of the community. So top 4 reasons for employees to come back to the office. Lo and behold, it's to have that connection, and some of it's probably consistent with what we were initially discussing. So collaborating and staying up to date with what others are working on are the most challenging activities at home. So we were making sure our kids are doing homeschooling effectively. It was quite challenging to be able to be an employee at the same time in a virtual sense. So in this particular research, they found 74% of the people say that they say people are the most what they miss at work. 55% say collaborating with others is harder at home. There are tools. There's Miro, as Stacey was mentioning, and Slack as well. But still, collaborating is harder because you have the distractions, and it is an uphill struggle to be able to get up to speed with some of the tools that are out there. And also staying up to date with what others are working on is harder at home. So you have these sort of smaller groups, like, Michael, you were mentioning earlier that you have the smaller groups where learning is happening bi-directionally, and you can jump in on an admin mode to participate. You can jump out, you can leave the meeting, you can come back in. It's flexible, but what does that do to us, on a long-term basis, and how do we learn? How do we retain what we need to do and how we need to do it?
Can I present a different
Sure.
perspective? Okay, great. Look, I don't think the numbers are probably far off in terms of, according to McKinsey or Deloitte or whatnot, in terms of who wants to stay home full-time. I think the emphasis is more about the flexibility piece. So according to the studies that I've read, about companies are only expecting 20 to 40% of people to return to the office full-time, if that. And it's more about how do we create an environment that people can seamlessly work wherever they want without missing out on anything at work. I think as well, it's really good to plan for the future. We all have to plan for the future. I mean, we're doing it a choice. At the same time, being mindful from a psychological perspective, we're nowhere near the end of the journey yet. So these things that people are missing, of course they are, because if anyone's familiar with how change happens, the pattern is not a straight line. So people will go up and down, they're going to miss things, they're going to not miss things. So we can plan ahead, but I'm very careful about not planning too far ahead, because there are still things we can't control. We can't control this virus. We can't control when there's an outbreak or when there's, a spike. Just looking at what's happening in Victoria. They thought they were at a point, and now it's gone another way. So yes, it's important to plan ahead, but knowing that people are still well and truly on this psychological journey. I'll just mention something around that webinar that I attended that was run by Slack and Atlassian, which had a lot of good little nuggets in there. And something that really stayed with me is they talked about how people, in the change process, especially when it's something traumatic, desperately are hanging on to what was, the activities that were in the office. Like we have to recreate them. Like Michael was saying, how do we just recreate the same training over Zoom? And you can't, actually. So it's a big letting go process at the moment. So instead of trying to recreate the activities as they were, you need to create something else with the same purpose. So what purpose did those activities serve? Not the activity itself, but how do we get that purpose back in another way? And I think that really resonated with me. Whatever we were doing before, where everybody was mostly in the office, and what those things that they're missing, how do we get that purpose if we're going to be in the office, not in the office, whatnot? And that's the complicated part.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. I was chatting to someone recently who had just started their very first job during COVID. So they were onboarded to this company. They'd obviously never met anyone from the organization. It's their first real experience of work. And if you extrapolate that, there's probably, I don't know how many people going through a situation now, and depending on how long COVID lasts, but it's probably a whole cohort of people for whom this is not a new normal, it's just the normal that always was.
Yeah. I onboarded somebody during COVID. So I had a new people and culture advisor. I'd hired her right before it all started. And I had a decision to make. Could I just not start this person all too hard, But luckily, I had actually worked in a completely remote team before I started at Choice. So this was not new to me, even in the normal before. So started her. And like you just said, she knows nothing different. I asked her if she feels like she missed out on anything. She said, no, not at all. I feel like, I know what I need to know. I can connect with people when I need to. So it's that letting go piece. People are they're hanging on, like it's got to be how it was,
There's another, I'm just going to move on to did you want to add anything, Duco or Nazia, before we just move on to the next slides?
Well, to sort of focus on your slide here with what people prefer, I think Stacey's comment is very valid that, we don't know yet. We're in different phases. We'll prefer different things. I think because so many of us are still in lockdown, we crave social connection. And obviously spending 8 to 10 to 12 to how many hours at work usually fulfilled that. So that's obviously how we directly relate to that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we need that again. What I would like to say is that also with flexibility, I think the workplace of the future will look quite different. I think employers, I'm very curious to hear Michael's opinion on this, and that of Stacey, is that you will require more flexibility from your landlord. I think quite a few people have probably PTSD from negotiating with their landlord. They're paying exorbitant rents in the CBDs across the world, and COVID hits. They're not even allowed to work from there, yet the landlord is like, okay, we'll pay up to $50K a month that we had in a contract. And that's been pretty, scarring for quite a few. We made the decision of giving actually 4 months of free space out. So that we took a hit, but we thought that was probably the right thing to do. So demanding more flexibility from an employer point of view, and eventually the one that pays, decides, I think we'll make some serious changes. I think if you look at the trends, flexible, furnished office spaces are going to be more in demand. Who says we're not going to get a COVID-20, right? COVID-19 means there were 18 before us. So there's lots of different things that people will look now at thinking, do I really need to have a rent? Do I have to pay rent? Just like, do I need to own a car? Or can I just get a go-get or a car next door of sorts? So, and employees, will obviously have to follow that trend, but also will have their own demands. They will want to work closer to home because guess what? Suddenly they had the time to spend with the 2-year-old that they never had. Suddenly they were able to do a few chores here and there. So I think there will be some changes. And to be honest, I think they're only going to be positive.
What happens after the 4 months free, Duco?
Sorry?
What happens after the 4 months free office space for you?
So what we did is we gave out 4 months of free office space. We had quite a bit of demand of people coming back. So we've been very proactive in terms of COVID-19, right? We have, well, you can't really see it from here, but we have, footpaths. We have lines on on the floor. We have, before you can come in, there's huge stickers where you have to sign declarations on an iPad. You have to get your temperature checked. You have to do your blood oxygen levels as well for those that, are asymptomatic. So we have lots of different things. So that obviously helped people feel more safe. So they've been coming back, but not everyone can come back because abiding to the 4 square meter rule means every other desk has to be closed. I'm in an office or in a room right now that usually can hold 10 people. Right now, that's about 2 people max. So what we said is, look, we only want you to pay for the space that you will be using, regardless of the contract you signed. So now that's what they do. They simply pay for the space that they use. And again, that means that we have a drop in revenue for sure. But we've done still. If you look at our peers, our utilization rate is about 2 to 3 times as high because we are, in a sense, very proactive and because we care about our tenants in that sense, right? So I think there is payoff in actually treating your customers like kings or queens. But what does the future look like? I don't know. I do think that co-working can either get a boom or a bust, depending on where the market moves. And I have no idea what that will look like yet.
We have an interesting comment from one of our viewers. Get ready for people to move regionally and not want to travel to Melbourne or Sydney every day.
Oh, I can't agree more. I see that trend already happening. Yeah. You see that trend in co-working spaces as well, where those co-working spaces in the fringes, in the communities, outside of the CBDs are getting busier because people are like, why would I travel in public transport with potentially people that have COVID for an hour to work at my office and an hour back? It's like, why would you? So, and especially now with the, with autonomous driving, well, that will take probably 10 more years. But once that happens, why would you work in the CBD why would you live in the CBD? You can live in Wollongong, jump in your car, which is then a living room because, hey, you don't need to drive the actual thing. So your office is set up, maybe you have a little espresso machine, or who knows, maybe you have a TV with a Netflix series on it. Then you get to your work. The car will then go into a pool where it starts texting people around because really you haven't even purchased the thing. It's just a contract that you have with Uber where you pay for the luxury vehicle. I think you definitely see that trend. And that's only good, especially in a country like Australia. My God, there's a lot of land available that's not being used at the moment, and it's beautiful.
It sounds amazing. I love your description of the future, Duco. I'm loving it.
So this is another couple of slides I want to share is comparing sort of older workers and mature age workers versus millennial and Gen Z. It might be a little bit different, Michael, in your case, where when you spoke to that particular person whose first job out of uni, I'm assuming, was in this current COVID scenario. But this is for people that have experienced both pre-COVID and now post-COVID. And interestingly, older workers are more likely to feel accomplished at the end of the day while working from home and are more aware of what's expected of them. Whereas the millennial and Gen Z workers are finding it harder because of distractions. Is that consistent? Would you say that is consistent, Stacey, with choice?
I'm not sure on that one actually. So we haven't deep dived into age groups. Ours has been more general. So if I said anything, it would be an assumption. So I can't really comment any more than what you've got on those slides. Could I say, probably be in the older age group? That I probably am less distracted, maybe because I did not grow up in I wasn't born in the generation, of social media, so, I think it is different. I think my attention span might be longer, only slightly because I've succumbed, but yeah, I can only assume. We haven't deep dived into age.
If I could just offer one potential reason for this, if you go to the average baby boomer's house and you go to the average graduate's house, usually one lives with roommates and the other one has a garden, right? So the working environments that we have access to are quite different as well. So yeah, there could be more distractions simply because, you don't have as much space where you can hide. So that could be one potential reason, but like Stacey, I haven't actually done the research on it.
No,
so it's hard.
It's a good point though. We have some people at Choice who at the beginning absolutely did struggle because they had a few flatmates and they were working in a common area. So yeah, I can definitely get that where, I have a very private area because I have a family and I have a house. So that makes total sense.
Michael, I'm just
Paul is commenting on it as well.
Sorry, I interrupted you there. Go ahead. Diego?
No, sorry, I was just pointing towards Paul in the comment section also pointing towards the discussion we just had, agreeing that, he lives on 4.5 acres. Yeah. I wish I had that, Paul.
When it comes to L&D, Michael, designing L&D sort of programs for sort of the mature age workers versus the millennials and the Gen Xers, as you have, the requirement to use more tools, virtual tools. Do you see there's some challenges coming up or some opportunities to be able to upskill and reskill employees that are not as, hasn't had the exposure to use a lot of online collaboration tools and project management tools and beyond email and messaging?
I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at it by age bracket.
Okay.
What I would say though is that broadly as a rule, you need to be where the learners are. So whilst we used to communicate with learners via email a lot, right now we integrate with things like Slack and Microsoft Teams because that's where learners happen to be. So the idea is you reduce friction as much as possible and engage with them where they want to be engaged with. I guess to your broader question though, around what do you do with older people and how do you upskill them on some new technologies, this is, I think, actually a huge problem in that there's vast groups of people whose jobs have been made redundant, and then these people need to be skilled to find new jobs. So it's this whole idea of how do you upskill displaced people. And the classic example is, well, Uber's going to replace taxi drivers, let's train these taxi drivers to be data scientists. But the question obviously is, well, actually, would they want to be data scientists, and would they be good data scientists, and how would you actually do that? So it's a big existential problem. I don't have the answer, but it is something that people need to think and work on.
Duco, I remember speaking to you about a particular person that you were in touch with who was helping people re-enter the workforce.
Well, there's particular organizations that do that.
Yeah.
And one that I think has done a stellar job is Transition Hub. So Transition Hub does leadership programs, but also, as the name implies, helps people transition into new careers and sets up such programs, for instance, for larger corporations in Australia, but really across the world, in Asia, you name it. And what they do, however, is not so much training in terms of how to use these new tools, but it's more, like you mentioned, around helping people transition into new careers. So these are usually, those times where they usually come in during these difficult times. Whether that's personal, where you want to change your career or you want to upskill your leadership skills, which is not always terribly easy, as I've learned, or where you've been made redundant and you have no choice but to either upskill or move on to something new.
Yeah, I've seen the outplacement industry change quite a lot. So outplacement typically was around, say, Deloitte is making a whole bunch of people redundant. They would play outplacement companies to help these people polish up their resumes, get interview practice and find new jobs. But actually, when you speak to them, it's getting harder and harder for people who are made redundant to find like-for-like jobs, because it's not that they did a bad job, it's just that job doesn't exist anymore. And so the question is like, what job should they do?
Yeah, so what Transition Hub has done, and I cannot speak for them, but they've focused a lot on transferable skills. So becoming more aware of what are your strengths and weaknesses, how can you double down on your strengths, becoming aware of your transferable skills, where else can you use them, so sort of changing your perception of where you belong. I think too often we place ourselves in boxes. I've worked in X industry, therefore I should stay working in X industry. All of these things, like Michael said, these jobs simply don't exist anymore. There's going to be a lot of that happening now and in the future. I mean, radiologists, I had a discussion today with someone about radiologists. Hard to obtain that degree, highly paid jobs. Also, the first thing that's now being replaced by AI. Visual AI is actually more accurate than a radiologist in many cases. Now, we don't have enough use cases to say, it's in every single particular category. But for instance, in breast cancer detection, it's shown to be very accurate. So you have that, but then you still have to wait as well for people to be comfortable with the fact that a computer just gave you a diagnosis. Now, that takes a little bit longer than the technology usually does. But that's a whole different discussion, so I'll stop it there.
Anything to add, Nazia, Stacey?
I was just thinking it's really interesting around, there's just sort of multiple factors, right? So you're talking about what are the kind of different trends, and that's outside of a COVID future as well. So there's the impact of COVID and us operating differently, but there is also, as Duco, you were saying, around the introduction of AI, for instance. And so it's about sort of, matching a future workforce to align with all the future trends, and so much of which is still very uncertain. So there's this kind of making me think about how much work there is to do and how much there is to think about, and how different the world could possibly look in 10, 15 years, if not sooner.
I'll just add, it's funny you talk about radiologists. Duco, my sister is a radiologist and her husband is a stockbroker. And if you think about these two professions as professions, they're both highly paid, but it's all about pattern matching. And if you think about what computers are really good at, it's basically pattern matching. So I was talking to them and I was saying, in a nicer way, but you guys are kind of fortunate in that you were lucky to get in this at this time when it's a highly valued profession, but it hasn't been totally disrupted by technology so far. And their perspective was that, well, that may or may not be true. It probably is true. It's just a degree of time. But also it would be that the skills that you need change. So stockbroking, it becomes more of a sales role where it's more about the person-to-person relationships rather than being awesome at picking stocks because computers are better at that. And then from a radiologist point of view or medical profession point of view, it becomes more about, well, actually, how do you manage that doctor-patient relationship as opposed to the diagnosis itself?
Yeah, so this is the last slide that I wanted to share in this particular research piece is of the people wanting to return to work, what are they looking? So the bars represent the different things that they're expecting. So they want stricter policies against coming in sick, increased opportunities to work from home. Obviously, we have been discussing that throughout this webinar. Increased office cleaning, increased distance between workstations, all the way through to the elimination of the shared workstations. And employees who did not have assigned seats prior to COVID-19 are 1.5 times more likely to say eliminating workstations is important to them. So this is in I guess, Duco, in your situation, is this what you were probably, is this one of the drivers to when you said you're not sure, it's kind of uncertain what's happening in the co-working industry in general because of these requirements that employees are asking or your tenants are asking for?
Yes and no. I think, in a way, it's actually a lot easier for, say, a company to join a co-working space that manages all that piece than for them to do it themselves. Like, that can get very costly. We have all of that except for air purification. Instead, what we do, we found actually based on research, it's better to air out the entire place. So all the windows at 12 p.m. are opened, fans are on, and the whole air is refreshed then to use air purifiers. Having lived in China for 8 years, I have used air purifiers and I also understand the limitations of them. So we did not opt for that particular solution. But I think more so economically, we are in a recession. The worst is yet to come. What will happen? What will people become more entrepreneurial, or will they go into the fields and take over where the work holiday makers used to go, right? That's very hard to say. And if you look at, for instance, the crisis in 2009, some countries that actually help increase entrepreneurship. And if you look at previous crises as well, oftentimes when people are with their backs against the wall, they'll fight. So that may very well be the case, is that entrepreneurship increases, and therefore the value of co-working spaces where you have that shared learning, that peer-to-peer learning, additional resources, in a way, it's a very efficient way to start your business, may become more attractive. On the other hand, maybe people won't become entrepreneurial. Okay. Maybe people, and if they do, maybe they'll do it virtually because, hey, that's possible too, right? So I find it very difficult to give you an answer, and I think usually the answer is somewhere in the middle. But I think the key thing from the slides that you've been showing is people want flexibility. Because if they find the place is not safe, they want to say, you know what, I'm not coming in anymore until you fix it, and until then I'll be working from home, right? So I think flexibility is going to be the key word moving forward, and being proactive in managing people's fears as well around COVID-19. And that is way more the case in, say, Australia than it is, say, in the Netherlands, where I'm from, right? Very different way of approaching this, very different outlook on it as well. So it does tend to sort of differ between countries.
I think also we have to remember there's a spectrum too of people. Mm-hmm. So there are absolutely people who, are still, I'm in New South Wales, so, we can go out and do a few things, but choose not to, and absolutely safety is number one. But there's a spectrum of that. And there are people on the other side of it doing things as soon as that restriction is lifted, you know? So I think the complexity for us in managing this as an organization is how do we meet everyone's needs? How do we meet the needs of the people that are desperate to get back in the office? And how do we meet the needs of the people that are anxious about anyone being in the office? And, you know, I think basically my whole team, we just became work health safety officers for quite a few months, just to manage all that. I mean, looking at this would resonate pretty much with, I think, where choice would sit. But I also think it's temporary, like everything else. You know, this is where people are right now, you know, and it is, you know, I'm kind of just mirroring what Duco and Michael are saying. It's very hard to project even 3 months from now, if these numbers, you know, would be the same. For example, the number one is stricter policies against coming in sick. Okay, well, those are in place, you know, so obviously, you know, for at least for us, that would shift. So this is a forever changing landscape. You know, what I do know, what I think I know is that no matter what, workplaces are going to look different. They're going to look safer. You're not going to see hot desking. You know, choice is is as open plan as you can get. And, you know, I'm having my facilities manager price pods, you know, that we can bring in, removable pods that you can move around within the space to create little phone booths, for lack of a better word, where you can have virtual meetings, you know. So I would say I understand these numbers, but I don't know what they will look like in 3 months' time.
Yeah, I mean, how would you manage this from a cost perspective as well? You know, implementation, and you know, you would need an entirely different team. For example, in installing an air purification system, you would completely need to redo the facilities design and retrofit a new air purification system, and you know, there's cost and there's maintenance and there's so much that comes with it. So yeah, I just found it really, really interesting. Nazia, did you have anything? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just going back to what I think the common theme is very psychological. So people just want to feel safe. You know, yes, you can pull it apart in the different areas, but what they want to see from their company or the places that they work is communication around what they're doing on a regular basis to keep them safe. That's it in a nutshell, you know, whatever that might be. And no news is not good news right now. They want to hear this communication on a regular basis. Even if nothing has happened, for example, you know, right now, you know, we're asking people to work from home unless they're essential to be in the office. Even for us to say on a Friday going, nothing's changed. We're just monitoring numbers. You guys keep doing what you're doing. We'll do what we do. You know, it's really that aspect, you know, is just making people feel secure as much as you can, give them the certainty in an uncertain world, and let them know you're there and connected to them in the most simplest ways.
And there are also jobs that you just simply cannot work from home, right? You cannot do it. And I would say, you know, choices in that complex area where you have to be physically, the testers need to be physically at the facility, at the labs, right?
Absolutely. So they're the ones we have to protect.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that means that we have to be a little bit harsher on everybody else in a nice, tactful way. But, you know, getting lots of requests, oh, I need to come back. We need to deep dive into that and go, well, why do you need to come back? You know, there are people that actually need to be here, you know, if they want to have their job, you know. It's a really delicate balance because you've got the balance of people's mental health, you've got the balance of people that need to come into work, and you've got everything in between. So, like I said, it certainly kept us on our toes. It certainly has made us all work health safety officers for quite a while, you know, and we still are to a certain extent, you know, but things are evolving. And I say that now, but, you know, in 3 weeks' time, if the numbers changed in this state, we'd be having a very different conversation, wouldn't we?
Definitely. And I guess, you know, what we can see from that slide is those responses, they're very much referring to people feeling, you know, what people are looking for in terms of feeling safe when they're coming back, right? So they're talking about providing hand sanitizers and even the the space from the in the workplaces and stuff. So it feels like that's the question that they're answering, like what do you need in terms of coming back and feeling safe, rather than maybe what do you need in terms of, or what do you want in terms of a different workplace now that you've kind of had a taste of how things can be a little bit different. I think one observation as you guys were talking, I kind of thought is that one of the maybe unintended positive byproducts, although I don't know if there were any intended or unintended consequences of COVID, but I think is that everyone's sort of on a level playing field now, and a lot of things are becoming acceptable in the workplace that previously weren't. So for example, maybe being more open about mental health issues or things that people are going through, or even people having different home situations. Like previously we'd be talking about sort of part-time employees and them needing to leave work early to pick up their kids and things, and part-time employees often not feeling like their co-workers feel sympathetic towards them. But now everyone's in that kind of space, and so I think just the fact that everyone's on the same on the same level provides sort of a lot of opportunity to really rebuild something that works for everyone.
Yeah, I remember Choice back in March, April, when we had that initial scare. Choice organized these sessions for kids, the workshops for kids, like learn painting, magic sessions, and science experiments, and those were really, really cool. I really must admit, and my son had an amazing time participating, and I think it's just trying to look at different ways to ensure that your employees are connected to the organization, more so than the output that they're expected to make for the organization, right? Great, I think so.
I would just like to say one thing on level playing field. I think I completely agree that obviously people will have to be more accepting of people working from home, and that's only going to help a lot of people. To be honest, I think it's going to really have a good positive effect. But one thing that's also become increasingly clear to me, at least, is that it's become more obvious how unlevel the playing field is. We work with, for instance, international students as well. During COVID, we set up a virtual program to help international students set up businesses. They are extremely hard hit. Many do not have a whole lot of money to their name. The majority do not. Are reliant on food baskets given out by the Treasury Department, Study New South Wales, for instance. And a number of them participating in our virtual programs came back to us saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't finish this. I don't have any internet at home because I couldn't afford it. I had to go to XYZ's friend's house, or my computer broke and I don't have the money to fix it." So it's also, I guess, really showed that stark contrast and discrepancy in wealth and that divide, unfortunately, and that's particularly the case with international students in Australia, which have in many ways been neglected, depending on the state that they were in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, agree with you 100%.
I think that would also be similar in some circumstances. I mean, international students, they're not Australian citizens, right? So they do have restricted facilities and help that's available to them. You're right. It's a difficult scenario. Are you seeing that improving now from the initial stage? Is it
I think that the government, for instance, the New South Wales government has taken more active steps in doing that. The department that's responsible for that, they can only do so much depending on how much funding they're receiving. It has improved, but it's still a major struggle. It's absolutely horrible to hear the stories. And if you look at how other countries have done that, For instance, the UK and Canada, I think they have supported their international students in a much better way than we have, despite international students basically making up our exports in education, being the third largest source of exports for the Australian government, worth billions of dollars. Let's put aside for a minute that they are students. Let's look at them as customers. Wouldn't you support your customers during this time? I know I would, because I'm going to be still dependent on them in the future. So I think the country is slowly waking up to the fact how important international students are to our economy, which also leads to immigration, which is the second largest income source for the Australian government after the ATO. So, you know, they are slowly waking up to it, and there is increased support, but it's not been fast enough.
Yeah, very valid points. See, one of the topics, one of the keywords that kept on recurring throughout our conversation is flexibility, right? And went around to look for any sort of best practices, methodology to promote flexibility in the workplace. And I came across this piece by McKinsey. And what we want to do as a result of our webinar today is to come up with some action points where we have another 12 minutes left for our webinar. And so in addition to discussing these, the issues that have arisen and some research that's out there, I wanted to get some feedback on this particular piece from everybody. So in terms of creating a flexible workplace, right? That has flexibility in it, but also promotes accountability. What are your thoughts on these, 7 elements? So you've got cultivating a one-team culture, clarifying decision-making and reporting lines, establish common platform and technology. This is what we have been discussing so far. Is there something that we can add to this as well in the, in the environment that we are in Australia right now?
I think these are all, best practices regardless of COVID-19, I think. Yep. One piece that they may not have put in there is about taking care of your employees, the mental health piece, an often overlooked piece that we've all discussed, quite extensively earlier on. When they say digital workforce needs flexibility and accountability, well, yeah, they also need support. And that's what I often find missing.
And it was a trick question. And it is the main reason. I mean, I found mental health completely missing in all the best practices methodology to promote flexible and accountable workspace. And lastly, I just wanted to end up on this Venn diagram. We've got the 3 dimensions of the future ways of work. We've got, the people and the jobs and the tasks that they need to do. We've got the organization, and we have the physical workplace, and all the overlapping elements. The ikigai, if you will, is at the center of it is the future of work. If we are able to target the overlapping elements, this is in our perspective is a way to approach the future of work. So if you were to starting with Duco, if you were to provide in 3 words or just in a sentence, how can you plan ahead for the future of work, but not plan ahead too far, like Stacey mentioned? What would it be? What would you
You're really putting me on the spot there, Shadab.
We will all go.
3 words.
Including myself.
Okay. I think what has generally worked well is being open-minded, being flexible, and being collaborative. Open-minded that, what Stacey and Michael were saying is, well, we don't know what's happening. Trying to predict the future doesn't always help, but, trying to look at what are some macroeconomic trends, I think is definitely useful. Also, the collaborative approach is, well, even just like today, right? What you've organized, I think, is very helpful. We're sharing ideas. I think that's very important. And yeah, being comfortable with not knowing, right? That's about as much as I can say at this point.
So great. So open-minded and be comfortable about not knowing, right? be comfortable about uncertainty. That's not easy,
Yeah.
but it's good.
Yeah,
How about you,
and being
Michael?
collaborative, right?
Yep, collaborative.
Well, I guess obviously you don't know what the future holds. I like what Duko said about the slide previous to this, that those things about flexible working are actually just good business practice. And that's probably a lesson we can take from this whole discussion really and extrapolate into the future. So for example, when we were talking about how do you keep people productive in a COVID environment, the root cause is that person motivated at all, which is something that needs to be solved regardless of whether it's COVID, whether it's remote, whether it's flexible or anything else. And then you can take that through to everything, like is that person engaged? And that's a root cause thing that needs to be solved. Is the organization supportive, well directed, well led, and are the managers good? These are all root cause things that if you can nail them, then it's almost like whatever the future holds, you should be in pretty good shape.
Stacey?
So I am normally a big sky person talking abstract, but I'm going to go a little bit more practical in case there's any people here that are trying to look at things for their business. One thing I'm going to say that has worked really well for us planning now and for the future is getting ongoing feedback. So we used to run surveys a lot fewer throughout the year, and since we've done them every 2 to 3 weeks, we're getting quick actions that we can turn around that are making people feel safe and actually helping us get to the root of things. So get your feedback ongoing, but actually do something with it is what I would say, because it creates a whole lot of psychological safety and also pushes you forward with some momentum. The other thing is creating a organizational language around certain things. So if you're using tools, start putting some guidelines around them. So, we're going to use Slack for this. We're going to use email for that. Just simple things like that, because otherwise there's communication confusion. And we've already found that. It's like, well, are we on Slack or are we on email? And this is going to continue into the future. We're going to have tools coming out of our ears. So you got to decide what suite of tools you're going to use and how you're going to use them. And the last thing that's become really important to us is meeting culture. So there's all this work and research around how to run meetings. And it seems like such a little thing, but it's the foundation for your collaboration, honestly. So what I suggest is that people, they assess their meeting culture. Do our meetings work? Because right now in the virtual world, that's really going to come to the head. Like if your meetings weren't working before, they're certainly not working now. And if you can get that right, your meeting culture, you're probably half of the way there to collaboration. So that would be my 3 top tips.
Fantastic. My personal feedback on this, I would just choose one at this stage. I would choose culture and identity. As we spend, more time at home and away from the physical workspace, we get disconnected. And it's that, constantly, pushing yourself to remain connected with your, with your coworkers, and connecting and linking up with coworkers that you wouldn't have under normal circumstances connected with. And one of the tools that I really liked that Duko discussed was the games that you were talking about, how to keep the sort of interaction going with these tools like games and interaction and I don't know, a lot of people might not be a big fan of having cameras pointing at employees so they can feel that they're working together. But I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea to be able to have cameras around, not to obviously pry on their work, but just to know that there are people around. So
yeah, Stacey, take notes. Shut up says he wants to do gaming while at work while you're not watching him.
You know what? If we can gamify things, I'm all for it. Whatever works, right?
So there's a Slack channel on a few gaming like LAN parties. They try to do at work. So, Nazia?
It's interesting. I mean, so it just this morning we had like a 4-hour let's just stay on Zoom together while we work, and I don't know, it's just completely pointless, right? We're just there seeing each other doing our work, but for some reason it feels fantastic, right? But look, I think, if I had to look at the your Venn diagram, I just think it's a really really wonderful opportunity for like innovation. I can already see people working, because we're in this kind of environment anyway that we're having to think about working differently. It sort of feels like there's a lot more permission to kind of go down that path, and so I think I think that's the kind of focus area that I think I'm most excited about.
So I think we've reached, it's 3:27 now. Thanks to everybody for attending and taking the time, and thanks again for with the rescheduling of the webinar. Really appreciate for everybody to take the time and making the effort for being today. It is an important topic. It's constantly evolving, but hopefully we've been able to provide some insights as a result of this webinar. Did you want to say anything, Nazia, as parting comments?
Look, I just think I'm blown away by all your insights. As Shadab said, this is such an important topic, and it's important to everyone. Everyone is most people are employees, and work is such a big part of people's lives, and has a massive impact on people's social outcomes. So some of the really interesting things that I've heard from you. I love that first one, that getting comfortable with uncertainty. We don't really know what the future looks like, and there's so many different factors that come into play, and getting used to that and getting comfortable to kind of constantly sort of realign. I think the notion that productivity can be higher, even though we're not all sitting together and we're sort of doing things in our own way. An increasing focus on mental health, which is a wonderful thing with or without COVID. And also the other interesting thing is around, like, it's wonderful that people are able to spend more time with their families, but how can we make that in a way that's also, not detrimental to mental health and better for family functioning? And so that's something to think about as well. But I mean, I just wanted to say a really big thank you to all of the panelists. You're so amazing. And massive thanks to Shadab for putting together such a wonderful session. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.